Ladies and gentlemen, we're just about to get started, please. So if you'd like to take your seats. Good evening. My name is Sean McGoldrick, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Facilities Services here at the University of Nevada, Reno. I want to extend a thank you for attending this evening's presentations by EMG of their recently completed expansion of the university's ADA transition plan. The format for this evening's event includes a presentation by EMG staff, along with real-time captioning and YouTube live streaming, which will also be available on the UNR website afterwards. By way of background, the university completed its initial ADA transition plan in 2007. The study prioritized the academic operations of the university, focusing on classroom and research facilities. As part of that initial studies, a sizable list of barriers was identified and prioritized, and since then, the university has been committed to making headway to eliminate these barriers. While we still have many barriers we need to address, I'm happy to report that all the items ranked as a high priority have been fixed. I would also note that barriers have been removed when remodels or full building renovations were implemented. For example, ADA barriers were eliminated during the recently completed renovation of Palmer Engineering, Thompson Hall, and Lincoln Hall. In our continued efforts to better understand those ADA barriers not addressed in the 2007 studies, we recently contracted with EMG. They're a national firm with a satellite office in the San Francisco Bay Area who have a great deal of experience in developing ADA transition plans. As part of their scope of work, we asked them to assess the ADA barriers of 14 facilities, including residence halls, athletic facilities, and 2 off-campus research facilities. Additionally, they performed a review of general campus pedestrian and access ways, and as part of their analysis, EMG provided some estimated costs for barrier removal. Now, please keep in mind that these are nationwide averages for construction costs only. They do not include all projects' costs, nor are they adjusted for regional construction differences, which historically have been higher in Reno than in many parts of the country. Now, the sole purpose of this evening's presentation is for EMG to explain how a transition plan is developed, to identify the applicable codes and explain the process they use to study the facilities and share the results, and finally to inform you how to provide your feedback concerning priorities for barrier removal. Once final priorities are determined and the 2008 transition plan is completed, we will post their 15 very detailed reports on the UNR website. In closing, the University and Facility Services are committed to making our campus facilities and programs accessible, and we will continue to invest as part of an annual program to reduce the numbers of these barriers. After the presentation, we invite you to ask questions about the 2018 study. If we do not have an answer to your question, we are asking that you email us so that we can research it and then post the answers online for everyone. This presentation, which will be posted online, will have information about how to provide feedback or to email us a question. Additionally, we have cards available with the email and website information. Now let me introduce Matthew Anderson, the program manager for EMG.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, as Sean was saying, I'm with EMG. We're a national company that does wheelchair accessibility studies. I'm a licensed architect and was managing the team of engineers and architects who were out here at the university for the last few months. Tonight's agenda is to introduce our company, to talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act. I know most of you are familiar with it, but if there are people here that aren't familiar, if we want to go over it in general, you can read more about it in the presentation and in the reports that will be posted. And then talk about the different facilities. We're looking at the sports facilities, 2 of the office campus research facilities, and then the residence halls. And then we have some cost summaries and information at the end. In terms of EMG, we're a large company with offices in various parts of the country. We used either local Reno staff or staff from the San Francisco Bay Area to come up here and look at the buildings, work with the staff on them, and then produce the reports. This shows you a map of the areas. The dark blue is where we have offices in the country. It talks about our staff. The red dots are where we have large corporate offices with our central servers and our backup servers and other information. We do have an office in Maryland, which keeps in touch with the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. And we've completed over 5,000 ADA assessment projects between universities and cities and retail stores. And then in terms of the types of portfolios that we work with, as I said, we do federal, we do education. We look at the various types of buildings, and different buildings will have different requirements, as we'll talk about later, especially whether it's a public building or a private building. And then these are just some logos from some of the clients, various universities, park districts, and various buildings, especially universities like University of Reno, where they have concerns about the housing or about the sports facilities. And then we want to talk about the ADA. The Americans with Disabilities Act, and I don't usually read things, but this is sort of a key point, is that it protects qualified individuals with disabilities from discrimination on the basis of disability in services, programs, and activities provided by state and local government entities. And University of Nevada, Reno is one of those government entities. The ADA ensures that people with disabilities should be able to arrive on a site, approach the building or facility and its amenities, and enter as freely as everyone else. And that's the key of what we're doing. And we'll talk later about priorities, but that process of parking at a property, getting into the building, and circulating within the building is key to the ADA. Now, in terms of the regulatory environment, there have been a lot of changes to the ADA since it started in 1990. And part of those affect the university because as you work through from 1990 to 1991 to 2004, some buildings may have complied in 1991. And now they don't comply because standards have changed, and there's a higher standard now with the 2010 ADA than there was when some of the buildings were constructed. So we looked at what code the building was constructed under, and some of these requirements to meet the current code aren't required until you make a renovation to an area. Others are required because they didn't meet the code at the time the building was built. But that's a key part of the ADA is working through the facilities and when was it built and what code applies to it. And then there are different parts to the ADA. The University of Nevada, Reno is what's called the Title II public agency. If you went off campus to a private store, that would be a Title III agency. And so there are some differences in requirements and differences in how we approach the facilities. Title IV with telecommunications only applies to a very small part of the university. Title V for miscellaneous provisions also is not used very much. It's mostly the Title III that we focused on here. And then in terms of that process, there was a Code of Federal Regulations that has been developed that was added to the 2004 ADA to produce the 2010 standards. And that's what we've been reviewing for is these 2010 standards. As I said earlier, they have more stringent requirements, or they've changed the requirements in some cases for those that were in place when various buildings were constructed. I don't want to read all of this to you directly, but it does talk about incremental change when something, for example, in 1991, you may have been allowed to have a 54-inch height on an item in a wheelchair for a side reach, and now it's down to 48 because it was determined that that provides better accessibility. So we've measured items and are looking at whether it complies with the code in which the building was built or the current code. And then these are looking at the Title II. There are program requirements so that the university, if it has a program that they need to make accessible, they could move to a different building or they could have two similar programs, one of which is accessible and one is not, as long as they're providing that same program to everyone. And then the key dates for facilities are whether it's built before or after 1991, and then whether it was built after 2012. And then as part of this transition plan, we look at a self-evaluation, and they call it a self-evaluation, although most universities hire a third party to do the work because they don't have the in-house expertise. But it's still a self-evaluation in that the Department of Justice or a court is not doing the evaluation. And that part of that self-evaluation is to create a transition plan. And the transition plan addresses the various areas that don't comply and puts in a timing constraint to that, so that, as Sean was saying earlier, the more important or the larger barriers are done first, and the more minor barriers are scheduled for a later date, as long as all of the barriers are scheduled and planned. Then in terms of the goals of the transition plan, you want to identify what it is. It's a structured plan that says when you're going to do things and identifies priorities. It talks about why you're going to do things. You may have decided that public facilities, such as the sports facilities, have a higher priority than the student intramural facilities, or have a higher priority than the research facilities. And that discussion is part of what the university wants comments for tonight, is if any of you use the research facilities and there's a barrier there that you think is important, then you should be talking to the university staff or emailing or making that information available to us. And then the third part of the transition is how, and how are these going to be done, whether it's from a timing standpoint, whether there's a renovation plan for the entire building, and all of the ADA barriers at that time will be repaired. As Sean was saying, 4 buildings have been through that already from an educational standpoint. And then the key points, as I've been talking about, is to prioritize repairs, find out what's most important. And again, we're looking for feedback on what's most important. The university will create an action plan, and they'll discuss that internally. Then they'll start to implement that, and they've already been implementing that and are committed to spending more money over the next years to implement the plan. And then the plan also tracks as things are fixed. So the university can provide information on what's been repaired, what's been replaced, and what the plans are for the future. And in terms of the plan itself, as I said, we've looked at sports facilities, off-campus research facilities, and the residence hall. And this is an update to the 2008 plan. So we're starting with what was done originally at that point, and we'll continue to work with barrier removals and discussing what's the highest priority. To get more specific, the sports facilities, these are the facilities that we looked at, and not just the individual buildings, but the pedestrian paths around them or between them. If you need to get from the athletics east to the athletics west, what options are there? If you need to move from the field house to Mackey Stadium, what options are there? So it's not just the building, but the grounds around the buildings. And then this is a rather large chart, and I know the numbers are hard to read from where you are, but what we've done is identify the various priorities across the top. And these are the priorities we developed using the Department of Justice criteria and talking with the university staff, where priority 1 is what we talked about for access to the parking and access up to the building. Getting the disabled community up to the building is the first priority. Then priority 2 is, once you're inside the building, circulating within the building to get down corridors, to get to classrooms, to get up the ramp to this theater. And then priority 3 is restrooms. Once you're in the building and using it, do you have access to the restrooms, and are they accessible, and is there proper signage? Then priority 4 is the remaining items that are inside, not related to circulation. And then priority 5 is employee-only areas. In the Piccoli Field, there are coaches' locker rooms and a coach's office. And so we want to make sure that those are accessible. But they're given a lower priority because there's fewer coaches than, say, the fans who are at the baseball stadium. And at the same time, with these priority 5 items, if there is a coach or an employee with a disability, then they can contact the university if there's a barrier to them performing their job, and those priorities can be changed. What we've also done here on all of these is identified a cost and the number of barriers. So that you can see at Piccoli Field, we identified 28 separate barriers at a cost of $153,000 as just priority 1. That would be the parking lot, the getting through the gate and into the building. And again, these barriers can be something that is striping on the ground that's a ½ inch too small, or it can be a series of steps. So they can vary from minor to major. And that's part of the transition plan process, is to look at the major barriers and to put them at a higher priority within these priority 1 items. And you can see that going down the list of facilities, there is a $500,000 at Mackey Stadium that, in terms of seating and access in various areas. And there is the intramural practice fields, which don't really have a building, but they still have some access barriers to not only using the facilities, but the students to watch the facilities. And we've totaled up these amounts here. And then we also have looked at what are the kinds of barriers we're seeing. And at the sports facilities, there are ramps in a lot of areas, but the handrails don't comply because they're too short, or they're ½ inch too tall, or as it says here, there's some problems with the stair treads, because you are allowed to have stairs or ramps, but if you have stairs, they need to be able to be used by someone with a visual disability, so you're supposed to have a white stripe at the first and last risers. We're seeing grab bar spaces that don't quite work, and these are pretty typical for the sports facilities that we're seeing these barriers. These are some examples, and part of our work was to measure the toilets. Are they within the proper clearance? Are they off by a ½ inch? In this case, the stairs have open risers, which is a barrier to someone using a cane. You don't want the cane slipping into the barrier or into the open riser. And then in this case, there's parking, but there's no curb ramp where the sidewalk was put in. And these are just some other types of barriers. We did all of the measuring with the digital level, so this is showing a ramp with a 9% slope, and I know the 9 is hard to read, but 8.33% is the maximum allowable slope, and so 9% means that it doesn't comply. And then in this case, there's a lavatory and a restroom, and that's, again, one of these situations we were talking about with in the sports facility in a coach's locker room. There's no wheelchair access, there's no grab bars, there's a number of barriers to a coach in a wheelchair using that room, and so that becomes part of the study. Or in this case, there's a crack in the paving. That paving complied when it was built. A couple of years ago, when the striping was put in, it complied, and now something happened and the paving cracked, and that crack is large enough that it's a concern for a cane or a wheel on a wheelchair. So it's become a barrier that we identified. In terms of the off-campus research facilities, we looked at 2 of them, the Nevada Terawatt and the Valley Road research facilities. We looked at the interiors, the parking lot. We looked at the way to get around the building. In some cases, there are tenants inside the buildings. We did not look at their tenant spaces because they're responsible for their individual tenant spaces. But we did look at barriers to get around the building, to get into the building. And again, the same format, the same priorities, where priority 1 is parking and access to the front door. Priority 5 is working with an employee of the facility, and the dollar amounts in the same format. Then in terms of the off-campus facilities, the typical barriers were in the restrooms. You need to have insulation on the drain pipes so that someone with no feeling in their legs doesn't get burned, and those have been removed or fallen off. There were a lot of doors without the proper clearance around the door for someone in a wheelchair to open the door. But it's these types of barriers. This is like the top 5 barriers that we saw at those research facilities. And these are, again, some photographs where you have no curb ramp here, even though there's parking spaces. You have an older drinking fountain, because these research facilities are fairly old. They were built a long time ago. This looks like an original drinking fountain from the 1970s that has never been replaced. And this again is showing where we've measured the controls for the heating system and the light fixtures. But this is the type of barriers and the type of research that we did. And then at the residence halls, we looked at these 5 halls. And they have been built at different times. And again, we have the similar summaries in terms of priorities. Some of the buildings, like Sierra Hall and Nye Hall, have a large number of barriers, larger dollar amounts. Some of the other buildings were built more recently, have a lot fewer barriers. But it totals the cost here again. And those all become part of the transition plan and part of the conversation on priorities. Again, the typical barriers for the residence halls have to do with, there's windows, vision light it's called, but it's really a window in a door. And they're set up so that a person in a wheelchair can't see through them. And they're there so that when you open the door, somebody else isn't opening it or coming into it at the same time, and it creates a safety problem if you can't see through it. So we're recommending those windows be revised. And again, those doors were installed before the ADA was in effect. There are steps in some of the areas that don't have compliant riser heights or tread depths. There are doors which are too hard to open. There's a weight limit, and some of these doors exceed that weight limit. And then some of the doors close too quickly, so that if you're in a wheelchair, you can't get through the door before it starts to close. And again, just some photographs of residence halls that don't have the proper striping on the steps. There's no handrail here at these steps, which should be provided. And again, accessibility is not just about people in a wheelchair. It's people who might be with a cane or have problems walking but still can use the stairs. And again, here's a door that should have taken a 5-pound weight or 5-pound pressure to open, and you can see it's almost at 8 pounds to open that door. So it would be difficult for someone in a wheelchair or someone using a cane to open the door. And then just some more items where the lavatory faucets don't have a handle that you can turn, so that if you have problems with grasping or turning, then that faucet's hard to use. Again, the signage, it says women, but there's no braille, and it's the wrong shape and color. And then this clearance around the toilet's not there because the lavatory obstructs the clearance around the toilet. So it's this type of barrier that we've identified. And then in terms of a summary, the pathways that we see here, we looked at an accessible route from each building to each other building, and not just the sports facilities, but all of the university accessible routes and university pathways. And in some cases, in 2008, the pathways were accessible because of settling, or in some cases, we now have more accurate digital measuring devices, and we're finding that something maybe 2.08% slope or 2.2% slope, where when you had a level and a tape measure, it looked like it complied, and now we find out it doesn't because of the more accurate measuring devices that didn't exist 10 years ago. But in summary, this is an overall cost summary that's been developed and the university will have online. This is the basis of working now with the transition plan to identify, among the priority 1 items, what are the higher priorities, or among these items, what are out of compliance by a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch over 5 feet, or where are there major discrepancies, such as no handrails on a stair or no curb ramp, where it's a true or major barrier as opposed to a minor noncompliance. And then again, the top 5 barriers for the sports facilities and the pathways and residence halls have to do with the accessible doors, steps that don't have the proper risers and the proper tread depths. Handrail extensions are not large enough, and then objects protrude into those corridors. So if you have a visual impairment, you might be walking into that drinking fountain we saw earlier, or a fire alarm, or sometimes they put in external defibrillators, and they stick out more than 4 inches, and so that improvement's been made since the 2008 transition plan, and those may need to be relocated. And then again, the top 5 priorities for this process are to remove barriers that would prevent you from getting into a parking space or getting to the front door of a building. Priority 2 is barriers that prevent you from moving around within a building in the corridors. Priority 3 is restroom barriers that you can't use the restroom or you have difficulty once you're in the building. Priority 4 is other barriers that might be controls that are at the wrong height, the outlets that are at the wrong height. And then priority 5 is barriers that affect employees. Someone serving at a concession stand in the sports facilities, someone in the dorm office for the manager or the assistant manager. And those barriers have been identified, but they may also move to a priority 1 if an employee has a problem or files a complaint with the university. So then the last question is really how you can help, and that's this website, unr.edu/facilities. On the right-hand side, on the navigation bar, there will be a link to, right in here, there'll be a link that will take you to the reports if you want to read through the detailed reports that list all the barriers and the costs. Within those reports, there are photographs, there are descriptions, they're the same cost tables we looked at. And then you can email questions to facilities@unr.edu, or again, we're looking for questions tonight if you'd have things that I can address or the university. But at this point, I'd like to take any questions or comments. Yes, yeah, raise your hands or yes.
So
I think we have a microphone up. It's a microphone up here also, if yes.
Is it on? So for the record, my name is Dora Ellen Igo. I'm a student here. It seems to me, because I'm totally blind, and I don't know if you were showing pictures, but maybe it would be best if you have audio description. And coming in here, there's just stairs. And if I didn't have my daughter, the railing, I would have hit it because it's above my dog's head. And I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. It's the stairs by the bookstore, I think, coming up here. So just so you know.
Yeah, as part of our study, we didn't look at the railings here or in the bookstore, but we did measure all the railing heights. And so yes, we have checked those. We've checked protrusions on the railings to make sure that they're within the ADA scope and code, they're in the proper places. And as far as this presentation, it is available, it will be available online. It has been adapted for screen readers so that if you go to a website, you can or have a screen reader, it will have a verbal description of the pictures that will the screen reader will use. So all the reports that are being posted are in the same situation where you can go to the website and the report will be read to you. So yes.
Two statements. One, I commend you for doing a very thorough job of the entire university. But my question to you and your company, do you have any of the individuals who did the assessment, do they have disabilities?
No, they don't.
Did you consider putting a blindfold on a person with a cane? Did you consider one of your employees using a wheelchair?
Yes, in terms of our training program for employees, yes, we have done that. But at this university, we didn't do it. But as far as their training, yes, we've done testing like that where they work with what's it like to be blind or what's it like to be in a wheelchair.
Training's great. Real world is different.
Mm-hmm.
And to have somebody do a full assessment of the university, because the university obviously has received this documentation in your report, which I applaud. It is impressive, very impressive. But when you have a person with a disability actually on the campus, as the very nice lady over there to my left just stated, or a person with a disability utilizing the sports facilities, things change. And I know there's other individuals in the room that will have numerous questions regarding the sports facilities. I graduated from here twice. I worked on campus in this Disabled Student Services office. My wife graduated from here twice. My family's graduated from here. This is a beautiful, wonderful university. But the transition plan, what is the duration?
At this point, there really isn't a duration to or we're still in the process of doing that. This is an update to the 2008 transition plan, and we're gathering information. in terms of the number of years that this might take is really a question that the university will be deciding in the next few months as we finish the transition plan.
Per your report, so the university is out of compliance.
Yes, there are areas that, yes, definitely they're out of
So
compliance.
violating the law of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Well, the Disabilities Act allows you to have a transition plan that sets goals and timing. And so we're working with the university to make sure that this transition plan does meet the ADA in terms of goals and timing.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay. Did you have a question down here, or is that, yes? Thank you. That's a good question. And no, we didn't have anybody on our staff who was deaf, who was at least currently deaf. I had problems when I was growing up, and in kindergarten I was deaf, but I'm not now because of surgery that was later done. We do have people that use hearing aids on staff who were part of the study, but not considered deaf. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is George McKinley from the Nevada Assistive Technology Resource Center on the campus. I'd like to request that the reports be put in an accessible format, that's EPUB 3, not an inaccessible or partially accessible format such as PDF. It's a fairly complex document, all of them, and it's really important from a navigation perspective that users, especially visually impaired, have adequate access to that documentation. PDFs, as such, are only accessible on a limited platform range. So EPUB 3 is necessary for these complex documents.
Yes, and we've been working with the university to make sure that they are accessible. I understand the concern, and yes, we are working with them to make sure that what's posted will be accessible and have yes, that will meet the ADA guidelines for the reports themselves.
That after they spent $650,000 fixing their goop up?
Yes, that was as of, I believe we were there in March. Yes, so that was as of March of this year.
Hi, David Nesbitt, just an alumnus also. I was wondering, on your staff, did you elicit any specific community support from Reno, Sparks area, when you were doing your survey, or did UNR provide you with any comments from the public?
Yes, we did work with the university staff and were made aware of comments or complaints that they were aware of. That is part of the transition plan initially, and as they go along, if the university gets complaints, they're forwarding them to us so we can see how that affects our reports or our data.
And a follow-up to you, or possibly to UNR, I'm just wondering when, if it hasn't been completed already, when will this information be disseminated to staff who assist the disabled getting around campus?
Well, I know that we're working in terms of the timeline. I don't know the exact date when this will all be finished. I know that we're still working on the prioritization, and that's what part of tonight is from a prioritization standpoint, coming up with recommendations. The questions that are sent to the email questions, the answers will be posted for everyone to see on the website so that you can see what comments other people have made and what the answers are. Oh, there's a question over here.
Hi, I'm Siobhan. I'm from a newspaper here in Reno. I just wanted to ask if you could explain to me just some of the background with ADA in terms of new construction. You talked about there are laws and rules for universities to come into compliance with things that are older buildings. What specifically is the responsibility of a university or a public entity with new construction? Can you just really break that down for me?
Sure.
Or with things that are being renovated?
Yeah, well, and those are very different. New construction has to comply with the 2010 ADA. So that, and the plan checking that goes on and building inspection all ensures that that occurs, so that a building built now will comply with the ADA. Buildings that were built after 1991 had to comply with the ADA at that time. And as I said earlier, some of those requirements have changed, so that if the building complied with the previous ADA, you don't have to make it comply with the 2010 until you do a renovation program. And then if you renovate that space, you have to make it comply. And there also are requirements for renovations where you have to spend a certain amount of money for that renovation. If you're doing a partial renovation to a building, say one floor or one area, then 20% of that money you're spending has to go to ADA compliance. Even if the area that you're working on does comply, you have to spend it somewhere else in the building. So the renovation is different from new construction. Well, yeah, if you no, if you're renovating an area, the area you're renovating has to comply with the current code. Well, that's where the university, as part of their renovation process, drawing up architectural plans and going through the permitting process, they will check and to make sure that it does comply. Occasionally there may be a technical infeasibility with the renovation. For example, if you had a parking garage, you're required to have 8-foot clearance to get a wheelchair accessible van into the parking garage. And if the concrete beams are at 7 foot 8 inches, you can't move a concrete beam. So they'll have to do some sort of alternative solution to get accessible parking for that building, but it wouldn't have to be in the parking garage you're renovating. But that's pretty rare. I think there was another question up here. Yes.
This is George McKinley once more. Is there a transition plan for access to the transition plan regarding conversion to EPUB so that visually impaired people have equal access to the transition plan?
Yes, my understanding is that as the transition plan's developed and if drafts or the plan itself is posted, that there will be ways for people that are visually disabled or visually impaired to have a screen reader read the document to them or to get that information.
That is not the case currently. It's in there is in an inaccessible version of PDF for a majority of readers. PDF is not an accessible format for the 50th time. Giving primary consideration to the consumer's assistive technology devices. It's very narrowly available, the accessibility of Adobe Acrobat. Please put it in EPUB format.
Well, and we
standards-based format.
We have access to Microsoft Word also that can be made accessible. And
It's a very complex document.
yes.
Okay. It's not that accessible even in Word. Okay.
Mhm. Over there first, then yeah.
Hi, my name is Marjorie. I am from Nevada Assistive Technology Resource Center, and I'm visually impaired. The hard part about navigating the campus is because you guys only have one address. Is there any way that you can actually have a designated address for each building so that way we don't have to, if we're gonna go to a new building that we haven't even, we haven't even gone to that building, we wanted to actually do it on our own instead of asking someone to take us there. Is there any way that we can only use we can use our GPS device to actually just go there if we have if the university has a designated address for each building?
Well, yeah, and that's something the university would have to answer because our study didn't really include all of the buildings. We have GPS information about the sports facilities from our work that we can make available to the university. But we can take that comment and work with them on their website. There's another question over here.
It was somewhat touched upon by the gentleman in the starched white shirt. In regards to Mackey Stadium, you're on 3 years of renovation. It was broadcast and promoted by the university for the renovation of Mackey Stadium to be the shining star to make it fully accessible. And it's been somewhat of a floundering orbit going into the sea because it's still not accessible. There's been numerous individuals throughout the community, as the question was presented, who've been more than willing to participate, and we have been shut out by the university, by the architects and the contractors. We're the community. Is there a time frame to have the, simply stated, have the repairs completed? Because it's floundering up there. It's getting worse per game.
Okay. Want to come up here or down there? Okay.
No, maybe I'll be talk from here. Just to repeat the question, maybe I'm not sure everybody heard it. I think there was some interest in understanding the renovations at Mackey Stadiums that took place in 2016 and 2017. Both projects resulted in non-compliance as it relates to ADA. Even though both of them we were sort of assured, not sort of, we were assured by our architect that in fact they were ADA compliant. The reality is the 2016 project did not fully meet the ADA compliance. The 2017 project, which was intended in part to resolve the 2016 ADA nonconformance, also failed to meet ADA compliance. Since then, we've hired another architectural firm. They've been working with us. We have a design agent on board. We're working through design. We expect to have a design done probably in the late January time frame. And that design is intended to make the errors of 2016 and 2017 fully compliant. So we're starting to work through that. We suspect the work would probably in 2 phases. Some amount of work will get done in the spring of next year, and we'll probably try and get that work done by the 30th of July such that the football season next year won't be affected. At the end of the football season in 2019, let's say that's the 1st of December, we'll pick up the work again in December and have it all done in July of 2020. So the timeline, as I know it this afternoon, is probably we'll be in better position 30th of July next summer. And our hope is that we're going to be fully compliant in the summer of 2020. Yeah, Scott, I'd probably tell you at this point we haven't worked through that. We're just at the beginning, of it. We actually have not even signed the contract with the firm yet. So, give us a little bit of time to get started on that. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Good.
Hey, Joe, could you share with them the story of the ramp, the lift key not there?
Once again, with structural issues, I know it's not with this gentleman's presentation, but it was just the accessibility issues throughout the entire Mackey Stadium that we can definitely discuss on a later date or even with the athletic department. Either one, whatever is going to be best for y'all. Just want to let the gentleman finish his presentation because it's a good one.
Yes, there's another question up here.
Can you guarantee that this will be compliant, or will it be like the 2016 and 2017 architects?
Well, we won't. That's a question for Sean more than me. I don't think we'll be involved in that, or at this point, we're not.
Yeah, I'd like to make sure I provide a little bit of clarity on that. That the work that we're doing right now is to resolve the scope of work that was done in 2016 and 2017. So as we start to take on work next spring and on the following year, that work is intended to make those two projects compliant. I think you saw during the presentation today the dollar amount at Mackey Stadium and in sports facilities. It's a large sum of money. So in the summer of 2020, when we're finally wrapped up, that does not mean that the entirety of Mackey Stadium is ADA compliant. We still have a lot of barriers we need to work through throughout the years to try and make that everything fully compliant, because there's parking lot issues that we're aware of, and there's a lot of bathroom issues I think that they've worked through. So as you read through the report, when we get it online here, hopefully pretty soon, you'll be able to see all of the barriers that are at Mackey Stadium. So I hope I'm a little bit more clear about what we're trying to accomplish with this work that's going to get done next summer and the following summer.
It sounds like they're not a priority.
Pardon?
You're making it sound like they're not a priority.
No, you might imagine that as you look through the report, there's many millions of dollars. And so we're seeking the input from people like yourselves as we're trying to prioritize many millions of dollars worth of work. So it's not as if everything is a priority one. There, in fact, is a priority 1 through 5, as Matthew went through. So we need some help to try and get through prioritizing all the work there. Yeah, we think so too, especially as it relates to priority ones. There's a lot of room within priority ones to make what goes to the head of the class and what doesn't go to the head of the class. The reality is the university has a certain amount of money, athletics has a certain amount of money, and so we need to focus our monies on what the highest priorities are. And there certainly is a recognition on our part that our handicapped community probably have a better sense of what's number 1, 2, and 3 than we do. Yeah.
David Nesbitt here again. My concern is more for the university also. I understand it's a long process to get these things fixed, and there are different priorities for different people. I'm just hoping that as priorities are met or things are changed here and there, this is communicated with not only the staff so that they can assist the disabled community to the proper places for accessibility, but also you enlist maybe the community, the disabled community. We've offered before, and I'm sure the offer still stands from all of us, to help maybe in-service staff on what needs need to be met. But the staff needs to know what has already been met and how to direct us in the proper way.
Are there any other questions, comments? Do you want to say anything in closing, or is that?
No, other than we appreciate you taking the time to come out, join us this evening, and maybe to renew the commitment from facilities. I certainly know President Johnson is very much behind what we're doing at Mackey Stadium and the ADA transition plan. And you have our commitment that the community, especially the ADA community, is going to be involved as we try to work through it. So thanks again for coming out.
For the contact information up here if you have comments you want to make to the website or to look at things on the website.